Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at ProPresenter 7. This is a package from Renewed Vision that actually is a media player that is used by a lot of churches, but really is an incredibly flexible production tool in a general sense. So we're going to be actually taking a look at how to connect ProPresenter with both vMix and TriCaster. But before we get into that, I'd like to invite all of you, if you'd like to call into the show, please feel free to connect with us. Uh, the URL's right there. So this would be something where, either if you'd like to call in and join us or you'd like to share in the comment section, that would be great. We love it when you're engaged. So let's get started. I think the first thing probably makes sense is to give you a very quick introduction to ProPresenter. So Renewed Vision has been developing this for many, many years, and this is the seventh version, ProPresenter 7. So it's really matured a lot. But the basic premise of ProPresenter, what separates it from other presentation software, is that you have all of the controls here on the interface. Oh, Ken, welcome. Thanks for joining here. I appreciate it. Uh, you have all of the controls for everything you do on the display, and you actually can assign outputs that go to specific monitors for different elements that you may be controlling. So you may send video to one monitor, slides to another, announcements to another. So you can lay all of this out and control all of that in a way that would work in a conference setting or in a ministry church setting. So let me just go through the interface a little bit so you have an idea, and then I will show you what we're actually going to be trying to create today with vMix and with TriCaster. So if you look at ProPresenter's UI, you basically have all the media assets that you have available are in your library, which is in this upper left-hand section. But then as you pull these media assets out, it can be a full presentation, it could be images, it could be videos. You actually can stack them up into what is effectively the list of assets I need for a full production. So if you had a conference going on where you had multiple presentations by multiple presenters, all of those could be listed over here. So then you just select the presentation or the media you want to play, and that becomes what's visible now in this large center space, which gives you control. One of the things that you see here is this is just a slide group I have set up, and we'll dive into what this one does in a minute. But if you look, the slides themselves have no background. And that's something else you can do uniquely in ProPresenter. I can actually take and assign backgrounds dynamically if I want. So I could have a whole set of different backgrounds here and pop different ones under slides, either through automation or through just a selection on the screen. And then everything over here on the right side of the screen is all about the media playout. So this lets me know what video is going to what outputs. So in this case, if you look here, I have, a few potential destinations that I could be sending video out to or slides out to. And so this is where I could pick which ones I want to monitor. And so it gives me, again, because this can go out to multiple destinations, it gives me a quick, easy way to uh, just check that everything is working the way I expect. So we're going to be doing more on ProPresenter in the future, but I just wanted to give people a sort of a context of what this product does. So what I'd actually like to show now is how could we use ProPresenter and the automation. Mr. Jeff Adams, hi. Yeah, you don't get many days off, so it's good to see you. Thank you for joining, Jeff. So what I want to go through here is how you would be able to use vMix as a automated recorder. So what we're going to do here is when I start the slide presentation I'm going to show you, it will trigger activity in vMix that will play a lead-in bumper with music, follow that up with a slide presentation. So this could be something like a teaching, at a service on a Sunday. And then when I hit the last slide in the slide presentation, it'll put in outgoing bumper and fade to black and save that, record that basically as a complete file that you could then upload right away to a website. So let me do a quick demo here of how this would look, and we'll do this with a two-box shot where I'll show ProPresenter on one side, and we'll show the output, so you see exactly what's happening all through automation here. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do here is I have this slide that I added to the slide presentation called Start. So when I click on this slide, what happens now is, oh, so I lost the recording in vMix, but it will it'll set everything up that we need now for the bumper, and then I will go through this, and I can go through each one of these as individual slides. And if you see, I'm just clicking along here. You could do things where you use the arrow keys. I could use the space bar. But then when I get to the last slide, what it's going to do is it's going to close this out and play the outgoing bumper that I need and save that as a file. So this shows you, without me doing anything else, that did a bunch of automation in vMix. And I'll just go and change the recording settings to be sure all is good there. But so let me switch over to vMix now, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing there. So I go to vMix here. So in vMix, what I have set up are, I have a camera. So this camera over here, which is part of the picture-in-picture we set up in the video. I have an NDI feed of the slides that are coming out of ProPresenter. And again, because we have that flexibility, I don't have to have it like a screen and a computer screen. I can send it out any way I want. And NDI is one of those options. I have a title, which will actually display the name of the presentation and the date and time and day, so that when you send this out, you automatically have all that information packaged in with the final recording. And then I just have the assets that we use. It is the intro bumper. It's a layered, a multi-view, as they call in vMix parlance, layered elements on top of a fixed slide. And then I have an outgoing video that plays here. And I have a blank slate, basically what I close on. And when I go to this blank slate, that's when we end the recording. I'm also here bringing in the audio. So the audio that's coming in here can be heard in the presentation. So for the recording here, let me just go in and see if I can put this in as just baseline and make sure that's all good. All right. So that was set up now for the recording. So if I run through this, there's a few things to understand. So the first one is that we launch all of this in a very simple way. So we have shortcuts set up. And let me just go in here. And what I'm doing for these shortcuts is I'm actually listening for MIDI notes. And this is one of the cool things. In ProPresenter, I can assign a MIDI note to a slide. So it will play that note and it can trigger actions. So in vMix, I'm using this MIDI note, basically note 0, to come in here and launch the welcome video. So when I do that, let me get out of here. When I do that, I'm actually coming into the welcome video, and I have a set of triggers that go on. So the first thing I do is I actually start recording. So that's the first trigger, and I do that as soon as we transition in. In addition, when I transition in, I also put the overlay up, and that puts a date and time, date and day, and I also put the titles in there. So this can be changed. It's just a file that we store that is read by vMix to put that title up. And then when the video completes, so it's a 5-second video, on completion, we pull that overlay off because we don't want that over all the future steps that we do. And then I fade into a input called Wisdom Fellowship. And this input, Wisdom Fellowship, is really, this is just the composited multi-layer uh, setup that we have here. So if I go to multi-view, you can see I have a background, and then I'm putting the ProPresenter slides in and camera one. So this is a way that we now have the layered video and slides coming in to the presentation. So I now, in ProPresenter, can step through each one of those slides, which is what I did. And that gives you a very easy way to sequence at whatever speed you want. And this system now is recording everything. When I'm done on the last slide, if I come back up to settings again and go to my shortcuts, I have MIDI Note 1, which is a trigger sent on the last slide in ProPresenter, and that launches the goodbye audio, the goodbye video with audio. And so when I go into here, let me go into triggers. So what this is doing, it's basically will play out, and then it'll launch as a fade in the black slate, which we have as a slide, which basically is just a pure black slate. And that slide, when it comes up, will just trigger on transition in to stop recording. So this creates the construct I need to save that video. An intro bumper, the entire presentation recorded, an outro bumper, and then a fade to black that stops recording. So let me just go into ProPresenter and show the other side of that. So if I switch back here and go to ProPresenter. So in ProPresenter, I created two special slides. This slide up here, which is basically, you see the word start sitting down there on it. And I have another one called end. So those are the slides I set up that I use to trigger the start and the stop. And all these other slides in the middle are just that. They're just informational slides that could be part of, Sunday teaching in a church. So let's though take a look at how I set up these startup slides. On here, you can add things that are called actions. So what I did is I set up an action, which is a MIDI note on. So let me just edit that so you can see. So in here, what I'm telling ProPresenter to do on this slide is triggering over MIDI the note on command for channel 1, note 0. So if this were something I was talking to a musical instrument, it would actually turn that note on and start playing it. But what this is doing now is it's sending that MIDI command, which is being picked up by vMix and used to activate the shortcut. And on the end, I'm actually doing almost the same thing, except in this case now, I'm playing a different note. Same channel, but now I'm playing note 1. And it's using that to trigger the end sequence. So if you see when I do this again, let's jump into the 2 box here, where we have the outputs here. So when I do this again, hopefully we will record this time. So now you can see that the video is playing because I just triggered that, and it's going into everything you have over in vMix for that whole trigger sequence. Now I'm going through these slides. So this would be exactly what you would do in this type of situation. And now I'm going to switch to the last slide, and it goes out. And those are the two triggers that we had as MIDI notes that are being sent into vMix. So how do we set up the MIDI? Because that's something that isn't going to be obvious. So the way the MIDI commands work, Windows doesn't have native MIDI. So there's no, so like in Mac, there's core MIDI, and that's something that's sort of baked in. So you need to have some type of framework that you can use to manage MIDI. And so what we chose to use for this is something called RTP MIDI, which is a free software application. You can get it on the web that will let you set up and control all your MIDI devices. So what I did here is I set up 2 sessions. And now you have to do this with 2 sessions because I need one session for ProPresenter and the other session for vMix. So in this case, I set this up as 2 sessions, and I went in and set this up and enabled the session now so these 2 devices could talk to each other, and they're both talking on the same computer, so there's basically no latency involved. So when this is running, messages pass through without having to go across the network. This would also work though with RTP MIDI set up on 2 separate boxes. So if I did this, I would be able to, let me just show you, I could come up here and you see I just added that, but I could go up here and I could configure any of this stuff for additional sources. So I'll just pull this out here. And when I go to connect, I could also add any other peers that are outside. So in this case now, I could type in the IP address, say of my vMix machine, if this were my ProPresenter machine, and give it a name and a port number, and they'll be able to connect across the network. So using something like RTP MIDI allows me to set up these remote connections between 2 programs that are effectively totally distinct. They're the only thing, the only conduit they have to talk to each other in this case is through MIDI. So this is something I can go, happy to dive deeper in the after show, but this should give you an idea of how you would set this up. So this MIDI control is now running on the system, and when I set up now in ProPresenter those MIDI outputs, it's using that session and routing them, and vMix is picking that up to set up the triggers. So what actually did we get out of here? Let me go through here, and hopefully I have a recording in here. So let's see. This is, yep. So I think it's this one. So let me just this again, hopefully. So now you can see that the video is playing because I just triggered that, and it's going into everything you have over in vMix for that whole trigger sequence. Now I'm going through these slides. So this would be exactly what you would do in this type of situation. And now I'm going to switch to the last slide. Those are the 2 triggers that we had as MIDI notes that are being sent. Okay, so what you actually saw there was the video that we just recorded in this last session where I just went through the process. And this is exactly now that I have this, I could upload this to a site. So if I had a church site, I could just put it up there before the service was even over, and that could be downloaded and viewed by anybody that wasn't able to attend the service in person. So it gives you now a very quick way, and you start to think of the flexibility that sort of sits in vMix itself, because this is pretty impressive. What I'm actually using vMix for is not live streaming. I'm using it as an automation system to construct a video as a set of components in a certain sequence, and then making that available downstream. So if I had recorded that into a directory that was waiting for files to, had an activity that was waiting for files to show up, and could pull that and upload it or FTP it or something like that, this whole process could continue on as a long automated stream. And this is the sort of thing, when you start to think of automation now, there are lots of different ways that you can integrate automation into a production that isn't just about, sort of the traditional, I'm triggering macros as part of a stream. This is now just using the raw capabilities inside a product to process files and do things with them that you need, again, as part of your production. So hopefully that gives you a good clue as to how this would all work. But there's one other thing that I wanted to share. So let me see, did I open up 2 of these? I hope not. But one of the things that I noticed when I started to do this is that there's no longer any way to easily install MIDI on a TriCaster. So for us, this would be an issue because most of what we do is TriCaster based. And this has to do with, new tech now is really clamped down on third-party applications running on TriCaster to try and, improve stability and give you more horsepower for the actual production tasks it does. But it has this limitation. One of the things that TriCaster can do, and we've demoed it in past episodes, is you are able to take and send web triggers, basically calling the IP address of the TriCaster with a certain extension on it to act as a trigger that you can then connect to macros. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to figure out a way that I could do the same types of things, but with a TriCaster. And I found an interesting way to do that. So let me jump in here to this slide. Now let me see if I can edit it. Okay, so if I go here, so this is the first slide that I actually have in this sequence. And one of the things that I have on this slide, though you can't see it, if I go down here and click, I actually have a web page assigned to this little square. And that web page actually is the URL that I need to send a trigger command to the TriCaster. So this is basically the syntax you use, the TriCaster IP, and then /v1/trigger (name equals). And so when that goes over to the TriCaster, it'll take that as a web key press, and you can assign that to a macro. And the way this works is I set the opacity of this web page to 0, so it doesn't show up. So now you can set up any slide you want. And if you copied this trigger down, you can trigger on that slide when you click on it any macro you want on the TriCaster. So for this example, let me just sort of jump back here and go back to show. If I go to this opening slide, so if we take the output from the TriCaster, because this will probably switch around, and I think this would be on the on our demo segment. So if I set this up, let's see if we can get that. Okay, so now this is just video coming out, which is, again, the same type of thing, a composite from ProPresenter done now on the TriCaster. So when I click on this first slide, what it's going to do automatically, without me touching anything or any of the crew touching anything, is it will zoom in a camera to me so I can introduce the slide. It can display the slide full screen and then set this back down to the sort of multi-box with me talking and the slide on the side. And so for each new slide that I go to, it does the same thing, an introduction. Then you can get to see the slides. So if I have more detailed points on there, you get this chance to see it. And then it comes back and does the multi-box. So this setup now is using triggers, because we couldn't use MIDI, to control the TriCaster. So this is, something that is baked in, and this is the power in these applications is incredible. And ProPresenter is a great example. There's tons here that we'll go into in future shows. But having the ability to do these types of things makes these so much more flexible. So now with these types of web triggers, any device which could listen to a web style trigger can now be controlled. And you could do more than one. So I could put multiple web pages on a slide if I needed to do things. And so this is going to give me a lot of flexibility. And it doesn't have to be just single macros. So say I'm doing this as a presentation, and when I hit a certain slide, what I'd really like to have happen is I'd like to switch to the TriCaster playing video instead of this slide here. Or I have a remote guest that I want to bring in at that point, and I want to bring that guest up in this box so we could have a conversation. And then when I move to the next slide, it switches back and goes away. These types of things can now all be set up on macros with the TriCaster and create these types of seamless slideshows that are really smart. They can do lots of things. So some of this could be done in ProPresenter itself. Others, like bringing in a guest, you'd need to have something like, live to air and be doing that type of thing with bringing in somebody remote. But this is the real power that's in these types of applications. And it's just another way to start to think of automation. Automation that simplifies workflow, but automation also that, oh, Jeffrey, how are you? So good to see you. And congratulations for those who aren't aware. Uh, Jeff recently won 2 Emmys. He was nominated for 4, and he just won 2 Emmys for a public service announcement he did for, I believe it was the North Carolina Volunteer Fire Department, where they cover a range of individual fire companies for his recruitment and sort of support and motivation. So, Jeff, congratulations! That was a great project and a great job. So, thank you for sharing that with everyone. Uh, so this is really everything I wanted to cover here. We can dive into any detail you'd like in the after show, but this is hopefully gets you thinking about different ways that you can use things like ProPresenter and different ways you can expand the production capabilities. And one of the key things I think when you think of things like ProPresenter, you often deal with volunteers. You deal with people at churches who are operating things but are not video professionals. So having this level of automation, now, Jeff, you're quite welcome. So having this level of automation can actually help the volunteer crew as well as make your productions run more smoothly on the professional side. So it's something to consider. It could make, life easier and get more people willing to volunteer if they knew that they could produce a great show without having to learn a lot of technology. So, okay. So for our next show, what we're going to be doing next week is we're going to be taking a look at the components inside of video optimized computers. And the key here is we're not really going to go through building a computer or recommending specific types of components to use. But what we want you to do is we want to give you an understanding of the different things to consider when you're assembling components or when you're buying a system. There are a lot of great system providers like Thomson Clare, Eastern Shore Broadcasting, that you're going to be able to ask them for certain things and to customize certain things. And so there's a lot of trade-offs. Do I spend more on memory? And if so, what type of memory, or on processor, on GPU? What are the pros and cons of different configurations of those components? And where do you get bang for the buck based on what you want to do? So that's everything we're going to be covering next week. So hopefully, Jesse, thank you. Yeah, and there are a lot of volunteer and part-time crews in a lot of different things too. I mean, schools, work with students, churches often work with volunteers, but there's a lot of organizations that depend on volunteer work as well to get these productions out the door. So in all of these situations, it could work great. So we're going to go dark, and then we're going to switch over to the after show. And I'll be hanging around for any questions you have. If you can't make it to the after show, I'd love to see you all next week. If not, I'll be back in a few. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So this was an interesting show to do. We had reached out to Renewed Vision. We had been looking at ProPresenter, and started to see how widespread it was being its use was, especially in the ministry space. But when we looked at it, we thought there was a lot more potential marketplace for this outside of ministry, mainly because it is so well organized for any type of multi-component event. So any type of conference you may set up. So this could be, huge in the corporate space as well, where you want to have a set of stacked presentations, but also have videos that can play out, have things that can go on large screen monitors or big walls behind uh, a stage. ProPresenter can do all this stuff. So, like I said, we just sort of we got our feet wet and spent some quality time with the product ourselves. But there's a lot more ground to mine here, as they say, and I think there can be some interesting shows. But so if there's anything that you guys could be interested in seeing covered, or ways that you think you might be interested in seeing this used, this would be something we'd love to hear from you, and just suggest different components of this we could cover in more detail. But this was for us though, as we started to see this, it sort of opened my eyes to different ways that the presentation space could be organized. And this is something that I think we're going to start to use as as a replacement for PowerPoint here, because I think it's just so effective, switching between actual slides or just throwing up images or little video clips. So I think this is going to be much more useful for us as well in doing this. So we're going to learn from this, share what we learn, but so far, I am incredibly impressed by what we've seen here. And one of the other things, and this is you learn more as you go through these things. Uh, Renewed Vision also makes something called Pro Video Player (PVP), and they're on their third generation of it. Uh, So, Josh, thank you. Yes, it is all about automation, and I think that's going to be a recurring theme that we're going to be hitting on in our new sequence of shows. Is really, as we start, we've sort of gone through a lot of the basic stuff that we've talked about in the past with lenses and understanding lighting, understanding sort of the general production design. Now, a lot more of what we want to do is looking at applying those things to real production scenarios. So actually, this is something, good segue to this. Uh, this is something we want to actually start to do as we move forward, and that's have these multi-show events, multi-show topics that we cover that will allow us to dig deeply into different types of productions. So some of the things we're looking at doing something for doing election coverage. It's a big election year, and there may be a lot of people who want to be doing that as part of their production. It's really too big a subject to cover in a single show, but we think sort of in a multi-show format, we can do things where we sort of set up the basics, show execution on everything from graphics design to automation to setting up the production space and everything you need for the session, uh, to actually the workflow that would go behind all this. How would you run this? How would you bring remote guest in? How would you bring graphics in? And some of the technical things that go behind this too, things that, it could be a deep dive into how do you take and bring a database of data into a production? Because not everything can easily fit in a file. So how do you do things that, could work with more database things or large sums of data? These are all interesting. So things with elections, things where you want to do sort of a large complex conference, things where you want to do esports. How would you cover that? And there's each one of these things has a sort of a language and a set of technologies that all need to integrate to make it happen. And so this is stuff that we're looking at doing. So part of what part of what we started out to do was really become a resource. Oh yes, Ken, I'm sorry. I got off on my own tangent here. So yes, PVP is Pro Video Player is a signage control system. So, but this is signage on steroids. So you can set up as many displays as you want, orient them, whatever orientation that you want, and it gives you the ability now to trigger different events, different overlays, so you could have backgrounds and put different images on top of that. So a lot of stuff that you can do with this. It's something we just started digging into. So hopefully this will be something again we'll integrate as we build our new set, because we'd like to do more with signage and sort of informational as well as visual appeal in terms of how we present things. So definitely something that we're looking forward to digging deeper into. It's also Mac only, so unlike ProPresenter 7 now, where they sort of ProPresenter uh, Mac and ProPresenter on PC now are basically pure applications. So they have all the same functionality, work the same way, and so they're bringing, they've brought their main product line up to stuff, and this hopefully will be something that you know might happen with for the Pro Video Player 3 as well, because that would be interesting at some future point. So Dennis, let's see, we use Pro Video Player. Uh, uh, so yeah, I mean, I think this is something, that, definitely, these are going to be, what's great is you have a lot of competition. So, I mean, Dennis's point is that because Pro Video Player in prior versions didn't support certain capabilities, they had to switch to a competitor. And now, that it's sort of caught up, they're considering switching back. And I think that's the great thing, where in this marketplace, there are so many different vendors sort of vying for your attention, your dollars, to make these types of products. So everybody's very attuned to what the marketplace is looking for. So I think this is just another example where Renewed Vision actually is watching, they're listening, and they're continuously improving. So sort of an object lesson for all of us. That's the baseline we all need to do, is listen to what people are saying about what we're doing, what we're selling, how we're packaging things, and sort of take that feedback and improve. And I think this is something where we're not always going to be perfect, and we're going to fall short. That's just the nature of the production space, working with technology and working with people. We all can make mistakes with things, but it's the kind of thing where you can recover, and by constantly focusing on that improvement. But we also, I think, part of it also is learning and adding new things. So that's why things like ProPresenter or Pro Video Player, if these are things that you haven't looked at before, and you're like, oh, I know PowerPoint, I got that down. Sometimes it's worth looking at these other tools, even if you're not thinking of using it right away, but to understand what it can bring, and then think of different ways that you can enhance your service, your suite of offerings with this. So, how many times have you been frustrated by the way PowerPoint handles things, where PowerPoint doesn't have an NDI out, that you can actually, easily send out to a production system. So you're in the same situation, where I'm capturing my desktop, or I'm taking a feed out from my extended monitor with my control monitor in sort of a 2-monitor setup. But you're not ever really, you don't really have a lot of flexibility. It's that one HDMI out that's coming from your PC. So, having NDI, having SDIs that I can send, being able to send video to widescreen monitors, basically say, these 3 monitors, treat them as one monitor. I'm going to put different elements on different components of that monitor. This is all in Pro Video Player. So I'm Pro Presenter as well as Pro Video Player. So how could that add to the value that you bring into some of the future productions you run? So lots of great opportunities to, find out about things and to sort of decide what makes sense for you to integrate. So it's sort of improvement on a lot of levels. Improve the product that you already produce, but also keep on the lookout for new things all the time to see what makes sense to extend your toolkit with, and also what doesn't. I mean, because a new fad starts doesn't mean you have to be jumping on it. But there are definitely some really solid tools that maybe service a niche, but actually could address a much wider audience. So that's really what I was thinking of here. So does anybody have any questions about what we went over today, because we covered things, but we did it sort of at a fairly high level. And I just want to be sure that if there were any things that people were interested in, diving deeper in, that we took care of that here as well. Okay, then. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to go through next week. So uh, one of the things that we've found when we talk to people is it's very difficult when people are ordering computers or building their own computers or upgrading computers with new components, uh, understanding the difference between all the different variants of the same basic components that they're looking at. So we wanted to make sure that we touched on, what are the different things you look for in a GPU? What are the different things you can look for in memory? What are the difference in CPUs? Now there's AMD and there's Intel, and both of them have incredibly powerful CPUs out in the marketplace. So what are the pros and cons? When does one make sense versus the other? Uh, and there were also, trade-offs. Sometimes, you know, adding, faster GPUs isn't going to really help the types of productions you're doing, where a lower end GPU is fine, but faster memory could make a difference, or faster CPU, or better networking. So all of these things sort of come in. So that's what we're going to cover on next week's show. We're going to dive into each of these categories and hopefully flesh out some of the things you have to consider when you look at these types of products. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us and for joining us here in the after show. And we'll see you all next Friday. Thanks a lot. Take care.